thank you everyone for joining our webinar. It's fantastic to see such an amazing turnout. Really happy to see all of you here, and it's great to see so much interest in this topic. Obviously something that is very close to my heart and Harshal's heart. So really excited to go through this with you today. My name is Philip Yules. I'm the lead developer advocate at Seqera Labs and also the co-founder of the NF Core community. I'm based in Stockholm, and joining me today is Harshal, head of scientific development at Seqera, and also one of the core team members for NF Core. Harshal's based in London in the UK. So before we get started, just a couple of kind of housekeeping things. We've all just been chatting in the chat box, but if you've got any questions, please use the Q&A tool within Zoom. We're only going to use that to handle the questions at the end of the talk, so drop any queries you have in there. Also, when we finish, we're going to have a very short poll. Please just take a few seconds to fill it in if you can. It's really helpful for us. And don't worry if I mumble or you miss something or you need to go and let the cat out. This talk is being recorded, and we're going to share that recording via email after the event's finished. Probably the slides as well. So Nextflow best practices, how to leverage NF Core tooling and standards within your organization. Something that I'm very used to speaking about, but with a slight twist today, which is kind of specifically about how to use this stuff within your organization. A brief outline of how today's going to go. I'm going to have an introduction talk. I'm going to go through the background of what these things are and what kind of things might be applicable for use cases for 20 minutes or so. And then Harshal is going to do a live demo, and we'll see how much of it breaks. It's always exciting to do a live demo. You never quite know what's going to happen. And I'll have a quick wrap up with some feature directions for 5 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. We'll do our best not to run over, but I can't promise anything. So let's just start with some background. I know there's a lot of you in the audience who already know a lot about this, but Seqera, both of us employed at Seqera, was founded in 2018, and we are the creators of Nextflow. We kind of spun out around this piece of open source software, and we're all kind of champions of open science. The main kind of tools we have in the Seqera stack at the moment, got Nextflow, obviously, we've got Nextflow Tower. Recently, we're kind of bringing in multi-QC as well as another open source offering, and Fusion and Wave. Nextflow is the reason we're all here, really. This phenomenally popular tool, which has really become the gold standard for running bioinformatics workflows and other workflows. Started off around 2017 and just gets more and more popular every year. Phenomenal community and massive uptake. For me, kind of personally speaking, I've been a Nextflow user for a long time. The reason that Nextflow got me excited about this in the first place is that it was one of the first tools which really delivered on the promise of fully reproducible runs. I can go back to an analysis I ran last year, rerun it with the same versions, and then get exactly the same results. Those workflows are really portable. By leveraging tools like Docker and Singularity, and also having all these built-in integrations with all these different compute environments, workflows can be shipped around to different users on different systems, and also that concept of it being incredibly scalable. You can write your pipeline and test it with just 5 samples, but you know that you're future-proofed. If you need to run the same workflow on 5,000 or even 5 million, Nextflow will be able to deal with that. Tower then is this kind of other tool written by Seqera, which is a kind of a command post, a layer on top of Nextflow to try and help you manage those workflows at scale. So as an end user, I've used Nextflow for many years via this command line interface, and it wraps the logic, the software, the compute integration. And what I realized I was kind of missing when I started using Tower was that there's this extra layer of organization of compute and configuration and sharing workflow run statuses, all things I was doing manually before Tower. There's a lot of talk about kind of no-code web graphical interfaces, and that's great. Tower has that, but also Tower has the command line interface, so I can do all of it still via the command line. So it's great for power users, as well as for people kind of new to the world of bioinformatics. Tower also brings a lot of value to an organization. So it helps you to reduce your cloud expenses, one of the big reasons for wanting to spend money on it. Helps you with collaboration, provisioning, productivity. Is hopefully a lot of real solid reasons for use cases for getting started with Tower. But the main focus of this webinar really is going to be NF Core. And NF Core is not, I didn't list it in the Seqera Slack. It's not owned by Seqera, but it's supported by Seqera, and it's an open community that was formed around Nextflow. NF Core has grown kind of in parallel to NF Core, to Nextflow. The two projects are obviously very intertwined, and I could never have predicted we'd have got to the point we are now with over 6,000 people on Slack, over 2,000 people contributing via GitHub, via issues and pushing code. Just phenomenal growth in the community, and no signs of slowing. When we started NF Core, we kind of set off with this set of principles. The reason we wanted NF Core was to help with cooperation and collaboration. We wanted to bring people together to work on the same set of pipelines. Now that Nextflow allowed us to produce workflows which were portable and reproducible, there was no reason for us all to build our own ones. And so in order to do that, we sat down and tried to write a list of standards, of best practices for writing pipelines, and try and agree on them, and build this framework to facilitate the collaboration of many people across different institutes all over the world. In order to do that, we built helper tools, and we try to focus on making these helper tools as generic as possible, so they will work on any Nextflow pipeline, not just NF Core. And more recently, we've started to collaborate not just on pipeline level, but also on components, which is something we'll talk about in more detail. So the product of this huge community then is the most obvious one is pipelines. We have 82 pipelines today, where you can go to the NF Core website, you can find the one for your type of data, your analysis, and off the shelf run your pipeline. We also have a suite of helper tools, which help you with both running pipelines, but especially developing pipelines with testing and automation. And then underneath the pipeline level, we now also have this repository of shared modules and sub-workflows. So if you look at the anatomy of an NF Core pipeline, the pipeline is the whole thing. That's what you run to do your analysis. That's all the end user kind of sees. But within that pipeline, now with NF Core, we have the concept of sub-workflows and modules. A module is an atomic unit where it's typically one tool running one process. And then multiple modules can be kind of stitched together into a sub-workflow. Those sub-workflows can be stitched together, and that's what runs when you run the pipeline. And by breaking the components of a pipeline down like this, we have more control over what we can share and what we can collaborate on. So you can just use a stock NF Core pipeline if you want, but what a lot of people do is they take, say, the RNA-seq pipeline or one of the others, and they'll fork that open source repository and make some changes, tweak it to work in the way they want to, and that's great, that's encouraged. Obviously, if you make any improvements, it's great to bring them back to the community, but we fully expect and encourage people to tweak and build on top of the baseline that we create with our pipelines. You can, of course, go a lot further than that. You can create your own pipeline from scratch using our NF Core based template. You can write your own sub-workflows, you can write your own modules, and you can also patch the public ones, which Maharsha will show later, but basically just means making small changes to the public shared modules so that they work in the way that you want them to. So these sub-workflows and modules then are shared outside of that pipeline. They're shared within a central NF Core modules repository. They can also be written within the pipeline if they're only local to that pipeline. And what's especially interesting for this audience is you can also have your own custom repository of shared components. So if you're working within a company with NF Core, you can have your own repo of modules, and you can collaborate across multiple pipelines within your institute with that custom repo, as well as installing from the central NF Core repo at the same time and having local. You can have all three of these types of modules and sub-workflows in a single pipeline. In terms of tooling and kind of a surrounding framework, we have this package called NF Core Tools. It's a Python command line package. You can install with kind of pip install NF Core. And this is mostly for developers, really. It helps you to build new pipelines. It works with a template. synchronizing for updates and creating new. It has commands to install these workflows and these modules from the NF Core repository. You can list and find them, install them, update them, patch them, even create new modules from a module template and then set up the tests for them in a semi-automated way. So lots of developer tooling here to make your life easier as you're writing new Nextflow code. We also have tools for building Nextflow schema. I'll touch on that in a second. Checking that your pipeline follows all of these best practices by a series of lint tests for the NF Core rules. And also, if you're just using pipelines, there's functionality such as listing NF Core pipelines and downloading NF Core pipelines for offline use, just to try and automate some of the common scenarios you might find yourselves when you're deploying and running Nextflow pipelines. I wanted to draw your attention to a kind of little spin out from the NF Core community, a new Nextflow plugin which we've just released recently called NF Validation, when basically this has come from code which was originally written into the NF Core pipeline template. We've taken that out, polished it up a little bit and put it into a Nextflow plugin to make it easier for other people to use outside of the NF Core kind of framework. What you can do with this plugin then is you can use these Nextflow schema JSON files, which basically describe all of your pipeline parameters, along with type information and patterns and rules. And then this plugin will validate all the inputs of the pipeline as soon as you launch your workflow. So you don't need to let it run and crash 2 to 5 hours down the line. You get feedback instantaneously. You can also build off those pipeline, the information contained within the schema to give command line help and other kind of feedback. One of the new things we're building in with this is we're going beyond just the pipeline parameters. And now we're building this same system up for sample sheets or data sets. And this is one of the typical ways that we see people building Nextflow pipelines is you run the pipeline with say a CSV file, which contains the paths for all of your different samples, all of your data, as well as metadata, which may be needed for the pipeline. And now you can create a schema file, which describes the expected format of that input file, what columns should be there, what the contents of those things should look like, whether it should be numeric or whether it should be a file. And you can validate the contents of your input sample sheet, again, with instant feedback. And possibly the most ambitious part of the project is also a new channel factory. So not only can we validate the contents of that file, but now we can automatically create an input channel based on the contents of that sample sheet, which you can then run straight into your workflow. So what was previously quite a lot of boilerplate code within the NF Core template, which has been built up slowly over the years, battle tested, is now a Nextflow plugin that you can import with a couple of lines of code and use straight out the box in any Nextflow pipeline. So I see this really as one of the success stories of the NF Core community, where something kind of growing up from our roots. So just kind of coming into the end of my introduction, I want to really point out that there's lots of different aspects here that I've talked about of parts of the NF Core community that we can collaborate on, that you can use. And I want to point out, I can use a bit of Swedish as I'm based here, a bit of a smorgasbord, all these different components. You can pick and choose which are most useful for you, which you want to use. The pipelines, the template, the sub workflows and modules, the linting, you can choose turn lint tests on and off according to what's useful for you, different aspects of a schema and different aspects of that command line tooling. And to give some examples of how that's being done kind of in the wild, in the community. So Alex Peltzer, who I was co-founder of the NF Core community with me, he's now based at Boeing at Ingelhelm. And they're a great example where they're a pharmaceutical company and they are building pipelines and using NF Core pipelines with the NF Core template. They're using sub workflows, modules. They've got their internal repository of shared modules. They're building pipelines of schema. They're testing with the linting tools. So they're really using like the full set here. And their custom modules repository is based on an internal Bitbucket Git server. So it's very flexible. So they're kind of all in on NF Core, which is kind of great. Backtopia is mentioned as a favorite pipeline here. Robert Petit over in Wyoming. Backtopia is not an NF Core pipeline, but it's a great example of how you can really contribute and collaborate with the community without having your pipeline in NF Core. So what Robert's done is he ported all of the kind of internals of his pipeline into shared NF Core modules, which go through the NF Core review process and pull requests, and anyone can use those modules, but his pipeline is kind of just outside NF Core. He's also using all the templates and standards. And then kind of final example would be Oxford Nanopore. They're starting to be heavy users of Nextflow for their workflows, which they give to users for all their sequencing instruments. There's a nice talk from their recent London calling event all about Nextflow. And they're using the Nextflow schema that we've established with the Nextflow pipeline, which is great because these standards mean that these pipelines work well everywhere. You can take a nanopore epitome pipeline and you can run it on Tower and it will work and you'll get a nice interface to it. So these standards really mean interoperability between different platforms and kind of great functionality. I asked on the NF Core Slack for some people to give me examples of where pipelines and tooling was being used outside, and I got given so many, I thought I should probably stop. So here's a quick smattering of logos of people all over the world using the NF Core template and framework here to great effect. So thank you for those of you who responded to my call there. And just out of curiosity, I couldn't help but having a quick look on GitHub. So what I did here is I pulled out a bit of random code within the NF Core template, which was pretty kind of specific. And I searched GitHub for that string just to get a rough idea for how many people have got public GitHub repositories that I could see, which are in some way based on the NF Core template. And depending which chunk of code I picked, I got somewhere in the region between kind of 600 and 1,000 different repositories. So the scale of the usage of NF Core is very difficult to see when it's not coming back to the central community, but you can get an idea here. The scale of usage of a framework is far bigger than the size of just those 80 pipelines you see on our homepage. So the impact of NF Core community is massive. Right, on that note, I'm going to pass over to Harshal here, who's going to try and convince you, if you're not already convinced, that all of this is dead easy and works first time. Harshal, over to you.
Thank you, Phil. Please pray for me, everyone. Right. I guess a good place to start is the NF Core website. So as Phil mentioned, I'm Harshal Patel, Head of Scientific Development at Seqera Labs, long-term contributor to NF Core and user also of Nextflow. And I guess today what I want to do is attempt to show you how quickly you can use the existing tooling that we've got in NF Core to then eventually create and run a pipeline on Nextflow Tower. So we have tons of documentation and information on the NF Core website. It's a massive community effort to collect and curate this documentation here. I definitely recommend having a look. You can also go and look at the pipelines and that sort of thing here. There's various ways that you can contribute to NF Core, either just using the pipelines or just coming into to help out with this sort of stuff, contributing to hackathons and various other things. So the first thing I'm going to go to now is just to show you that we've got on the website, there's this tools page here. So this is the Python package that we maintain as part of the community where we set up a lot of this tooling and automation. It's fairly trivial to install. So what I've done is I've basically got, I work on WSL2, shame on you, anyone that's using a Mac. And so here, I'm in my home directory. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a directory called webinar. I'm just going to CD into that directory. And so I've installed NF Core tools in a Conda environment. And so what I'm going to do is do Conda activate the Conda environment that has NF Core tools. If I do help, I can see that it's installed. Let's just make this a little bit bigger. And let me just make this a little bit bigger as well so you can see. Okay, so now we've got NF Core tools installed. There's various commands here, as Phil alluded to do various different things. You can list pipelines that are available on NF Core and when they were updated, when they're released and that sort of thing. There's also other tools that allow you to do various other things like creating modules and sub workflows now that we've added, which are really cool. It just makes it a lot easier to standardize the way that you internally would create these as templates and then contribute them eventually back to pipelines. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a brand new NF Core pipeline, a blank slate pipeline. So I'm just going to clear that out. I'm going to go NF Core create. Right, so that asks me for a name. I'm going to call it webinar pipeline. And I'm just going to say pipeline created for a webinar. And the author is the NF4 community. Do I want to customize this? Yes, I do. And I'm going to say that this is a Seqera Labs pipeline. And what I'm going to do is we're sort of partway towards doing this already. One thing that we get asked a lot is, would it be possible to simplify the pipeline template? It can be quite a steep learning curve, figuring out what goes where and why. And this is something that we're actively thinking about doing as well, to make things a bit more opt-in rather than having a ton of sort of code there that is functional, but may be quite confusing to step into. So we've sort of started doing that already, and this is sort of what that shows, is that you can customize the bits that you would like to have as part of this pipeline template. So here I'm just basically saying, I'm not interested in these bits. Maybe I'm not writing a genomics pipeline, so I don't need any iGenomes configs. Maybe I'm not thinking about submitting it to NF Core eventually, so I don't want the NF Core configs portion of this template. And so what I'm doing is I'm excluding bits of the template that basically may not be required for everyone. And so this will obviously will evolve over time, and we'll try and improve this. So I've pressed enter, and now what's happened is I've had a pipeline that's been created in this Seqera Labs webinar directory. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these commands out, because I want to make sure that I push this to GitHub. So this is my blank slate pipeline. I'm just going to go back into that directory and open VS Code now and close the other one. Right, so now we're in the root of the pipeline that we just created. And so you can see these are all the different files that automatically get created. When you provide the name and the description and that sort of thing, when you create the pipeline, that automatically gets substituted in the right places within the pipeline template. So it just makes it a lot easier for you to then have to just go away and edit the bits you want to actually make the pipeline functional. And so what I'm going to do firstly is I'm going to create, what I'm going to do first is go to my GitHub account, and I'm going to add a new pipeline, or a new repository even, call it webinar pipeline. And then I'm just going to create a repo here. That's all I need to do. And then GitHub will ask you to basically push something through. And so if I come back here now, I've got the pipeline which has been initialized and everything. I just need to push it now to Git first before I do anything. And so what I'm going to do is copy those back and replace those commands with that pipeline that I've just created. And I'm just going to push this to GitHub. That's the first thing. Beautiful. So now if I go back to the browser and I refresh this page, the pipeline's been pushed up to GitHub. Okay, so now we're ready to go. We're ready to add our own bits in. So what I'm going to do again is activate Conda NF Core to have all of the tooling at my fingertips again. So that works. So every NF Core pipeline, in terms of structure, and every NF Core pipeline has a certain set of directories. And with DSL2, we've got this modules folder. So the way these modules are broken down essentially is that we've just said that anything local to the pipeline that is likely to be niche to that pipeline can go in a local module. It's not something that maybe is worth sharing or having as a generic module, so you put them in a local folder. We have this NF Core folder, so these are modules actually installed directly from NF Core modules. So as Phil said, there's almost 1,000 modules now for all of these commonly used bioinformatics tools, FastQC, BWA, all of these. They're very atomic. So every subcommand has an individual module. So it just makes it a lot easier to share and stitch together these different components. And so every NF Core pipeline will have this sort of folder structure there. You can, of course, install these modules from your own Git repos, whether that's GitLab, Bitbucket. The tooling that we've developed is able to do that. So if we look at the NF Core modules help command, you can see that you can specify your own Git remote when you're actually using or interacting with modules. And so that way you can pull and push these modules directly to your remote and install them directly into your pipelines from there as well, which is another way you can sort of maintain and use some of this tooling to your own benefit. Similarly, for sub workflows, there's also a local folder in this particular pipeline template. We've only got a local sub workflow, but you could also now install sub workflows from NF Core. We do have some there. And a workflow, which is basically an end-to-end construction consisting of a combination of modules and sub workflows to analyze some sort of data, whether it's RNA-seq or variant calling or otherwise. And you can also have multiple workflows. If, for example, you need to, write a pipeline that works not only with nanopore data, but with Illumina data as well, you can have independent workflows for that and share modules and sub workflows between that, depending on how you want to design your pipeline. Okay, so another thing every NF Core pipeline comes with by default here in the template is this test config. This test config is very important to us because it allows you to test the functionality in the pipeline. The test data that you have for your pipeline will be different depending on what you need to use it for. So RNA-seq test data set will be different to one that you use for proteomics, for example. And that's something you can customize later on. But what's important to note is that this test config works out of the box when you create this pipeline, so you can start adding and removing your functionality and constantly test it. So it reduces that overhead already. And so let's just run a typical Nextflow command, which is just testing that this newly created pipeline works. So all I'm doing is saying Nextflow run in this directory here. I'm saying use this test config or this test profile with Docker and publish the results or the outputs in this folder called results. Right, so that triggers off Nextflow. And what will happen is Nextflow in the background will download this sample sheet. It will download any FASTQ files and anything that's defined in there. And it will run the test version of this just to ensure that this version of the pipeline is working. Right. So far, so good. So if we look in the results folder, you will see all of your results from running that particular pipeline are in this folder now. Okay. So now we know that the pipeline that we've just created works. What if we want to add something to it? So let's use the NF Core modules commands in tools to actually see what we can do for that. And as I mentioned, you can use your own remotes and that sort of stuff. There are various commands to interact with modules as well. So if I want to see which modules from NF Core are installed within my pipeline, I'll just do NF Core modules list local, and it will tell me that these different modules are installed from NF Core. I mean, we could be cheeky and just go and have a look, but this just makes it easier for you to see exactly what's installed, which versions are installed. And all of this stuff is actually tracked in a file, which we call the modules.json, where it shows you all of the different types, the different modules that are installed. If you install this from your own Git remote, whether it's Bitbucket or somewhere else, this URL would just be different, and that's it. The rest of it would stay the same. And so this way, we're able to sort of version track the modules that are installed in your particular pipeline. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to install a module called FastP and try and add it into the pipeline. So what I'm going to do is NF Core modules install FastP. And what happens is NF Core tools in the background goes to this NF Core modules repository and makes a bunch of API calls and basically installs the modules directly from here. So there'll be a FastP folder in here as well. And NF Core tools is going away and installing the main script and the meta YAML in your pipeline from here, and also tracking the commit and various other things to just make it easier for you to do. You can also search for these via the website as well. And you even get sort of a nice copy paste type command, as well as some information about what this particular module expects when it's running. And so that's clearly quite important because we've installed this module locally within this folder, but now we need to stitch it into our pipeline. And so what we're going to do is we will try and add that in. So here, I'm just going to copy this out and replace it with FastP. But before I do that, I need to see what these channels look like in terms of the reads, because FastP takes as input some sort of channels. I won't go into much detail as to about channels and that sort of stuff, but just to highlight how you would typically do this sort of thing, we need to see the structure of this input channel, because this main script or this module takes 4 elements. The top one is some sort of meta information or metadata. When we print this to screen, we can see that this is the sort of metadata that it's asking for, which is an ID, as well as information about the strandedness. And the second element are the reads. And so here you can see the reads are here as well. And so it appears like that input reads channel is exactly in the format that we need. But we also need to factor in that there are 3 other elements here that we need to set if we want to run this module. And so what I'll do is just copy this out. FastP. And so we know that's in the correct structure. I'm just going to set the other elements here. Adapter faster, I don't have one right now. I haven't been shopping, so I'm just going to leave that there. And these are both Boolean values, so save trimmed and save merged. So I'm just going to set them to false for now because we're not interested. I'm going to set this versions out there. And so now we rerun, oops. We're also now running FastP. So we've installed a local module, we've stitched it into our pipeline, and we're running FastP as part of this process for execution. Okay, so I'll just quickly let this finish. Right, now you may or may not want to use these modules as they come from Nextflow, and we've got another tool that allows you to change and amend this to your own requirements. And so what I want to do is lint this particular module for FastP. Linting just essentially just checks it for a series of things that we set as standards within the NF Core community. And so here we can see there's no failures because we've just installed this from NF Core modules. Everything was good. But now say, for example, I change a space in this particular FastP module and I try and lint again. What should happen is it fails, because what this linting also does is it checks your local version installed from NF Core modules is actually the same as the one that's in the remote GitHub repository. And if it's different, it fails the linting. And that kind of makes sense because we don't want to now, because we're trying to version control this, we don't want that divergence to happen. And so in order to overcome that, what you can do is use another really cool tool called NF Core modules patch, and in this case, FastP. What this does is it generates a diff that is placed alongside the module, but it also tracks this in the modules.json. So here you can see that this patch is there. So whenever you're interacting with the tooling and you need to update these modules and remove them, whatever else you need to do, this diff is tracked and maintained throughout. And so that's a really nice sort of clever way of actually customizing modules to your own requirements. And so here, if we now run the linting again, you can see now it's passing, which is exactly what we want because we've patched it in the correct way. Okay, so now let's add a new parameter. Let's call it if not params.skip FastP. Oops. But what I'm saying is, if the user doesn't specify a parameter called skip FastP, don't skip this process. For any good sort of Nextflow best practice in terms of development, you would also initialize this parameter within your Nextflow config with a default value. So now we want to add this parameter. One thing I do want to show you, again, that's something that comes up a lot, is this NF Core schema that we've got. So we've got this parameter schema in the root of the repository that's really powerful for a number of things, including parameter validation, pattern validation, automatic help text generation, but also it allows you to render all of the parameters in your pipeline in the user interface. And so what I've done is now I've added a parameter, but I need to update this schema. How do I do that? So we have another tool called NF Core Schema Build. what that will do is automatically detect now that I've got this new parameter in my Nextflow config and I've defined it. And so it's asking me, do I want to add that to the schema? To the schema, and I say yes. Then it asks me to launch a web builder. So you notice here, this has been updated in the background, and there should be a skip fast P parameter that's put there. But we want to organize this in a group and make it a bit nicer. So I'm just going to close this down and open it in my Chrome here. So what this does is renders a really nice UI. We shouldn't really have to edit these JSON files by hand, because it gets really messy playing around with JSON. And so what I want to do is, you can see this skip fast P parameter has been added here at the bottom. What I want to do is add a new group called trimming options. And what I want to do then is select that skip fast P parameter, add it in here. You can have icons and all sorts of other stuff here as well. This is a skip parameter, so let's give it a forward icon. Let's give it a description. Let's also say that this is a Boolean, because it's whether it's true or false, it determines whether this process is skipped, and that's it. So this is just one use case. You can obviously fan this out to other use cases and other parameters, depending on how you want to group it. It's always good practice to have these groups in place. And so here, we've now added this to our schema. We click finished. What should happen is this parameter schema now should have this trimming option here. So this is a really nice way of maintaining the parameters that you're using within your pipeline. And also, especially when you also want to start then interacting with Tower. As Phil mentioned, there's some really cool stuff coming around now via what's called this NF validation plugin. So in the latest NF core pipeline template, this will be included. It allows you to do this parameter validation. So for example, now that we've added this skip fast parameter, say for example, I try and specify that skip fast P is actually an integer when we've explicitly said it's actually a Boolean, then this validation should fail. And all of this is taken care of by this validation. It checks what's the default, what's expected, and it fails depending on what's required. So it's really neat to do that. And obviously the sample sheet type stuff is also really cool. There's a proof of concept on the RNA-seq pipeline repo if you want to have a look for including this validation plugin in NF4 RNA-seq. I won't go into much detail there just to save on time. Okay, so we've added a new module to the pipeline. We've added a new parameter, made sure that it's updated in this schema. Now let's see if we can try and run this pipeline on Tower. But before we do that, we need to push these changes up to GitHub. So I'm just going to do git. Oops. Right, so if we go back to GitHub now, we should have, if we go to the master branch, actually, this is just set the wrong default. We can see that these commits that I just pushed are there. All right, so now I'm going to go quickly to Nextflow Tower and show you what you can do with this. So Nextflow Tower is, as Phil mentioned, it gives you numerous features on top of Nextflow. Again, I'm not going to give you an introduction to Nextflow Tower because that goes beyond the remit of this webinar. If you're interested, there is some links at the end that you can follow up, and we're happy to have a discussion with you about you leveraging it within your own organization. So I've set up this quick workspace. A workspace essentially allows you to isolate pipelines and various users and teams, as well as compute in a really nice way. So it allows you to manage how you run Nextflow pipelines internally, as well as having run histories and various other things within your organization. And so what I'm going to do in this particular workspace is add this webinar pipeline that we've just created. And you can even give it labels as well. Let's add one for skip fast P if we want to run that with skip fast P, and then just maybe another label. just makes it easier to find. And then we can copy and paste the URL, which is how Nextflow typically works, via some sort of Git repo. We pick the master branch because that's where we push those commits. This work directory is where the intermediate files will go. We still want to run that test profile that I showed you and was running via the command line. And instead of specifying a relative path like results, what we're going to do is specify an output directory here, which is webinar pipeline results, and you add your pipeline. Right, so now we can launch that pipeline on Tower. I've already pre-configured compute for all of these different compute environments. So in theory, I could run the same pipeline on Google, Azure, AWS with just changing the output bucket, for example, and a compute environment. And so here, what I'm going to do is click launch. Now you can see that parameter schema that we just edited via the UI is also rendered here in Tower for you to then launch this pipeline. That skip fast P parameter that we just added, you can now also change that parameter there as well. And so here, what I'm going to do is basically just launch this pipeline on Tower. The defaults I'm happy with. It will take a second or two to launch. I mean, we could be cheeky and basically just come in and try and launch this pipeline also on Azure as well. So if I just change the prefix of that bucket, which already exists on Azure, I can just change the compute environment and launch. And I could even ask someone on the call, Rob, would you mind running a pipeline in this workspace? Okay, I think that's most of what I wanted to cover. One last thing is, why stop there? So why not use the command line? If you like the command line, let's use that to launch this pipeline. So we also have a Tower CLI, which is really cool. It allows you to interact with everything on Tower. And so now that I've added this particular pipeline to my launchpad here, in this launchpad, I can launch it from the command line as well. So what I can do is tw launch. I specify the workspace, which in this case is Seqera Labs webinar. And what did we call it? We called it webinar pipeline, I think. Let's double check. Yeah, we did. All right. That's it. So now what you should see is another entry here that I've submitted by the command line. And Rob has also submitted one. And this is a really nice thing about adding these pipelines and collaborating via users to do the same thing. You know, Tower gives you the ability to do that. But like I said, if you're interested in more details, let us know. And you know, if you're an existing customer, you probably know a lot of this already. If you're new and want more details, then we're happy to help. And I think I'm going to finish there, Phil, and hand it back over to you. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Brilliant stuff. Thanks very much, Harshal. I was curious to see if we'd get it running before we ran out of time. I bet it starts in like 5 seconds now when we stop screen sharing. Great. We're running over a bit, so I'll whistle through the final few slides quickly. Like I say, this is recorded, so don't worry if we're going too fast. We're covering a lot of ground here, I know. So the recording will be sent out afterwards. But I just wanted to touch on a couple of things of where these projects are going in the future, what kind of new features you can look forward to. So starting off with NF Core, a couple of key things which are coming your way. Harshal mentioned the template, how we're making that more granular with more feature flags in the future. We've seen quite a few people coming out with their own versions of kind of templates, which are often based on kind of cut down versions of NF Core because it is big. The primary use of the NF Core template has always been to build NF Core pipelines, which is why it's as fully featured as possible. But we understand a lot of people want to use just kind of core bits of it. So we're going to have a different kind of better user interface soon, where when you run it, you can choose to kind of build up the different things you want and try and have more control over that. The schema, which Harshal mentioned, is being brought out across different sample sheets. That's being scaled up to have more magic tools. You still have to write that JSON file for the input file for the CSV sample sheet. That still has to be written manually in JSON. So we're hoping to build tooling similar to the one that you've just seen, so to help with that creation process. got a brand new website coming really soon, which is going to just be so much better. Or searchable docs, everything is much easier to use. So that's going to be out in a couple of weeks, hopefully. So soon anyway. And also more on the automated testing front. Lots of exciting things with Nextflow itself, the tool. We've been listening to feedback from those of you who filled in the community survey and things. We hear you that you want to have cleaned up intermediate files as you run your workflow, so you don't run out of disk space, and you want better error messages when you're writing pipelines. So that's being actively worked on and hoping to see some things coming out soon. And also recently finished, so very soon to be released, is Fusion. This tooling that we have to work with file systems is now available not just in cloud with buckets, but also HPC, which is great news. Really fantastic performance there. And also Nextflow is getting, or has now got support for SPAC, which is a bit like Conda, if you like. It's another package manager frequently used in scientific computing. And through the SPAC, where we've got more support for on-the-fly container creation via Wave, and we're also working to have multi-architecture pipeline deployments, which means for those of you especially running on AWS who want to make use of the Graviton instances running on ARM, we're hoping to give you binaries with the pipeline, which automatically use the most optimized builds there. That's going to, again, make a big difference on speed and price. And taking a step back, thinking about Seqera and Tower, this is kind of an overview of the whole of the Seqera platform that we're going towards, of which the part that you've just seen, Tower, is kind of one part. We've got this core of these open source software tools, which we develop and maintain in the middle, but then around this, we're starting to build this whole ecosystem of tooling, not just running pipelines, but also working with that data before and after the workflow is run, to launch notebooks and interactive studios and things like this. So a lot of really exciting things coming your way soon, and happy to talk about that in more detail after the event. So, like I say, this went fast. There was lots of material here. If you remember one thing, just keep this, which is that NF Core is not just for publishing open source pipelines. There's a lot more there. You can build with NF Core. You can build with the NF Core community and with the framework, even if you're not intending to publish pipelines to the NF Core kind of repository. Community is a powerful thing. If you want to get involved, the best place to do it is the upcoming hackathon and summits. We're going to have 2 this year, one in Barcelona in October, one in Boston. If you're interested, check out the website there. The website's from last year. The new one is about to go live in a couple of weeks, but there's a form there where you can put in your email address to get updates for things like when registration opens. And this is a photo from last year's event in Barcelona with 50 of us from the NF Core hackathon all cooking together. This year in Barcelona, it's going to be double that number at the hackathon. We're aiming for 100, and it'll be 50 in Boston. So it's a great chance to meet everyone face to face and all these people we've chatted to on Slack. Also, reiterate here, this is a huge community effort. This is not just me. It's not just Harshal. There's hundreds of people who have put hours and hours into building these things. It's a community effort. We've got a photo from a retreat we had for the core team last year in Sweden. But this is only a tiny fraction of everyone who's involved. So many thanks to everyone who's listening, who's already been part of this effort. If you're interested in any of this, especially the stuff with Tower, but really any of it, support for Nextflow, support for NF Core, drop us a line at Seqera and we'll see if we can help. You can schedule a demo via this link here, or just get in touch with any of us who have been involved with the webinar. And finally, just a list of links. I don't expect you to read this. This is when we share the slides later, really, where you can find more information and more detail about the things we've talked about. Especially want to point out a couple of things. We've got a blog post on the Seqera blog all about best practices for how to write pipelines to work well with Tower, and also the podcast, which we've been recently revived for Nextflow, where we have a few episodes just recently. The one that went out on Monday is all about NF Core modules, sub-workflows, schema by the infrastructure team who have built those tools. It goes into a lot more detail and has a lot more background. So if you're interested in those things, check it out. We also have the previous episode and the one coming up are about core Nextflow features and things which are on the roadmap there.